7 years ago, he told her, "Don't interfere, I'm marrying someone else." But when fate brings them face to face again, one look at her son, and his world collapses. Was it destiny, regret, or the love he thought he buried? What happens when the man who broke her heart realizes he never stopped loving her? Stay till the end, because their reunion isn't just emotional, it's the twist no one saw coming. Where are you listening to me from today? Drop it in the comments. I love knowing where my beautiful listeners are tuning in from. Before we begin, please make sure you've subscribed and turned on the bell icon so you never miss another heart-touching story. Trust me, you'll want to watch this one till the very end. It's full of love, regret, and the kind of twist that stays with you long after it ends. So, sit back, take a deep breath, and let's dive into the story. The night carried a strange heaviness, as if the sky itself grieved what was about to end. The rain poured relentlessly over the grand marble steps of the Monroe estate, creating tiny rivers that glistened beneath the glow of golden lanterns. Ava Bennett stood there, drenched but unmoving, clutching the edge of her scarf as though it could hold her heart together. "Ethan, please. You promised me forever," she whispered, her voice trembling, her breath visible in the cold mist that surrounded them. Her words weren't loud, but they cut through the storm like a quiet plea that refused to die. Ethan Monroe, the city's youngest and most desired CEO, stood at the doorway, his perfectly tailored suit soaked, his jaw tight, his gaze avoiding hers as though looking at her would destroy his resolve. For a moment, thunder echoed in the distance, but it wasn't as loud as the silence between them. Ava's eyes searched his face for something familiar, any trace of the man who once held her hand under the same rain and swore he couldn't live without her. But tonight, he was unrecognizable. His eyes were cold, distant, yet beneath that mask of power and control, his heart screamed with a truth he was too afraid to face. "Don't interfere, Ava," he said at last, his voice low and steady, each word landing like a dagger. "I'm marrying someone else." The sentence seemed to hang in the air, suspended between lightning and heartbreak. Ava felt her knees weaken, her body trembling as if her soul had been pulled apart. "Someone else?" she repeated, her tone a mixture of disbelief and agony. "You're doing this, Taki, for your company?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence told her everything she feared, that love had lost its place to ambition. The rain grew heavier, blurring her tears until she couldn't tell which was which. "Ethan, we built dreams together," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You can't throw them away because of a contract." He turned his back to her, his shoulders rigid, his hands clenched. "You don't understand, Ava. This isn't about dreams, it's survival. Monroe Industries needs this alliance, and I can't risk everything for something as fragile as love." His words were harsh, but his tone trembled. Deep inside, he hated every syllable, hated himself for choosing pride over peace, power over passion. But he couldn't show it, not when the world expected perfection from him. He'd been raised to believe that emotions were weaknesses, that love was a distraction for men who failed to lead. But as he spoke, he could feel his chest tightening, every heartbeat whispering her name like a rebellion against his own decision. Ava stepped forward, her soaked heels clicking against the marble as she reached out, placing her trembling hand on his arm. "Look at me, Ethan. Tell me you don't love me anymore." Her voice was fragile, desperate, trembling on the edge of tears. He wanted to look at her, wanted to tell her that she was his heartbeat, that he saw no world without her. But he couldn't. Instead, he exhaled shakily, keeping his gaze fixed on the storm outside. "I told you not to interfere," he repeated, his tone colder this time, as though cruelty could drown out the truth burning inside him. Her hand fell away slowly, as if she had touched fire. There was a long, suffocating pause, followed by the soft sound of her scarf slipping from her shoulders and falling into a puddle. That sound broke something inside him, but still, he didn't move. Her tears mixed with the rain as she turned away, her lips quivering. "You're not the man I loved," she said softly. "You're just wearing his face." Those words stayed with him long after she walked away into the darkness. He wanted to run after her, to hold her one last time, to take back everything he said, but his pride, his fear of failure, chained him in place. Through the glass door, he watched her figure disappear into the storm, the wind swallowing her sobs. That was the moment he realized that sometimes letting go didn't make a man strong, it made him empty. The estate that once echoed with laughter now felt like a tomb, each corner haunted by her memory. Every wall seemed to remember her touch, every hallway whispered her name. But he had made his choice, or so he thought. The following morning, the world around him moved on. But Ethan didn't. The mansion was filled with silence. Even the ticking of the clock felt louder than before. His staff walked carefully, afraid to speak his name. He spent hours locked in his study, staring at the rain-streaked windows, pretending to read contracts that made no sense anymore. He told himself that he had done the right thing, that the merger would save the company, that love was a luxury he couldn't afford. But each time he closed his eyes, he saw Ava standing in the rain, her eyes full of betrayal and pain. Her voice echoed through his mind, breaking him over and over. "You're not the man I loved." That single line haunted him, more than any failure ever could. Days passed. He received congratulations on his upcoming engagement, business partners applauding his strategic brilliance. Yet every smile he gave felt forced, every handshake hollow. His fiancée, Charlotte King, the heiress to the empire that would soon merge with his, spoke with elegance and poise, but her laughter never warmed him. She was everything society deemed perfect, yet she wasn't Ava. Sometimes, when Charlotte spoke about their future, his eyes would drift unconsciously to the window, to the rain that still visited the city, as if mocking him for what he'd lost. He began to wonder, had Ava left the city already? Did she still cry at night? Or had she learned to hate him? The not knowing was a punishment worse than guilt itself. One evening, as the storm returned, Ethan found himself walking through his office alone. The city lights flickered outside, reflections shimmering across the glass walls. He stopped at his desk, his gaze falling on a small object resting beside his pen, Ava's scarf. His breath caught. It had been neatly folded, still faintly carrying her scent. Beneath it, a small white envelope lay untouched, its handwriting unmistakable. "Read only if you ever miss me." His chest tightened, his fingers trembling as he picked it up. The envelope felt heavier than paper. It felt like a weight of everything unsaid between them. He stared at it for a long moment, torn between opening it and pretending it didn't exist. But he couldn't. Not yet. Instead, he set it back down, whispering to himself, "I can't do this right now." His reflection in the glass window looked nothing like the man who once smiled with love. It looked like a stranger built from regret. Hours later, unable to sleep, he walked into his study again. The rain outside grew violent, lashing against the window like it was demanding his confession. Ethan's gaze fell upon the edge of his desk, where something else had appeared. A folded flight ticket. He picked it up, frowning at the destination, London. The date was marked just 2 days after their fight. His heart pounded, realization dawning slowly. She had left. Not just the estate, not just the city. She had left everything. For a moment, he sank into his chair, clutching the ticket tightly, his breath unsteady. The thunder roared, and he whispered into the storm, "You really left me, didn't you?" He could almost hear her voice in the wind, that same soft tremor saying, "You're not the man I loved." He looked at the unopened envelope again. Every fiber in his body wanted to tear it open, to hear her voice one last time through her words, but fear held him back. What if it said goodbye? What if it reminded him that love once lived here and now never would again? So he left it there, unread, untouched, like a wound he refused to clean. He turned off the lamp, leaving the room in shadows, the envelope glowing faintly in the moonlight. For the first time in his life, Ethan Monroe, the man who controlled empires and dictated destinies, realized he couldn't control his own heart. And though he didn't know it yet, that envelope would become the single thing he'd regret not opening for the next 7 years of his life. As Ethan stood by the window that night, rain blurring the skyline, the letter and flight ticket remained on his desk, symbols of a love he had buried too soon. And when lightning struck across the sky, his reflection flickered against the glass, revealing the ghost of the man he used to be. Somewhere beyond that storm, Ava was flying away, carrying the secret he never knew, one that would change everything when their paths crossed again. 2. 7 years slipped away like pages torn from a diary Ethan never meant to lose. The mansion that once echoed with footsteps and laughter had turned into a museum of silence. The rain still visited often, beating against the tall glass windows, as if reminding him of the night he had chosen power over love. He sat alone most evenings in his study, a half-empty glass of scotch reflecting the dim light, his gaze fixed on the envelope that never left his desk. It was still sealed, its edges soft from being handled too many times. Some nights he lifted it to his chest, some nights he set it back down like it burned his fingers. He had built an empire larger than his father's dreams, but he couldn't fill the hollow left by a woman who once stood in that same rain and begged him to stay. The merger that had once felt like victory had collapsed within 2 years. His marriage to Charlotte ended quietly. No fight, no drama, just two people too empty to care. Reporters called him the Cold Phoenix, the man who always rose again. But he knew the truth. He'd never risen, just existed. Every morning he woke before dawn, walked the halls of the Monroe estate, and paused by the window that overlooked the old garden. He imagined her there sometimes, standing among the roses, the hem of her dress brushing the petals, turning toward him with that same half-smile that used to undo him completely. But every time he blinked, there was only fog and memory. He had lovers after her, but none lasted beyond a season. None could replace the way Ava said his name like a prayer, the way her laughter filled the quiet. Sometimes in board meetings, a perfume drifting through the room would make his heart stop because it reminded him of her. He would excuse himself, stand at the window, and curse under his breath for being haunted by something he destroyed. Each time he came home, the unopened letter was there to greet him, waiting like a ghost that refused to leave. The world saw a man of power. He saw a man of punishment. Across the ocean, life had painted Ava's story in warmer colors. London had taken her in when she needed to disappear. The city was kind to her, its rain gentler, its people too busy to ask questions. With the small savings she carried and her sketches rolled inside a travel case, she had started over. The years that followed weren't easy. She spent nights sewing by hand, days delivering designs no one noticed, raising her baby boy in a tiny apartment with peeling paint and an unshakable faith that love would someday mean safety again. That little boy, Noah, was 6 now, bright-eyed, full of questions, and carrying a smile that mirrored Ethan's so perfectly that sometimes she had to turn away just to breathe. When he laughed, she heard the echoes of another life. When he looked at her, she was reminded that from heartbreak came the most beautiful creation of her existence. She had promised herself never to hate Ethan. Pain, yes, but hate would mean he still owned a part of her soul. By the 6th year, her perseverance turned to triumph. The fashion world began to whisper the name Ava Bennett Designs, elegant, timeless, built on resilience. Her studio buzzed with energy. The soft hum of machines and chatter of apprentices filled the air she once feared would always be silent. She wore confidence like silk now, her movements graceful, her voice steady. But on quiet nights, When Noah had fallen asleep, clutching his sketchbook, she would sit by the window with a cup of tea, tracing the faint scar on her heart that no success could erase. Sometimes she wondered if Ethan ever thought of her. Then she'd laugh softly at her own foolishness. He chose his world, she reminded herself, and I built mine. Yet deep down the ache remained, a memory tucked away, like a song she refused to replay. It was on an ordinary morning that her past knocked on her future. Her assistant, Emma, burst into the studio holding a crisp envelope embossed with a golden insignia. "This came by courier," she said, excitement lighting her eyes. Ava wiped her hands on her apron and took the envelope, her brows arching as she saw the sender, Monroe Enterprises. For a heartbeat, the world around her dimmed. She hadn't heard that name in years, yet it still carried the same sting. Inside was an invitation, formal, tempting, impossible to ignore. They wanted her to lead the design of their upcoming luxury brand relaunch, a collaboration that promised international acclaim. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through the pages, scanning the terms, the payment, the expectations. Everything was perfect until her eyes caught the last page. At the bottom, in familiar bold strokes, was a signature she'd once traced across her skin in candlelight: Ethan Monroe. Her breath hitched. For a moment she thought she might be hallucinating. She read it again. Same signature, same man who had once promised forever and walked away. Her pulse raced. Memories she had locked away broke free like floodwater. Noah's laughter from the other room snapped her back to the present. She quickly folded the letter and slipped it into a drawer, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. That night, long after Noah slept, she sat at her desk, staring at the contract under the dim lamp. The rational part of her whispered to decline. She didn't owe him anything, not her time, not her designs, not her peace. But another part, quieter and more dangerous, whispered curiosity. Why me? Why now? Was it coincidence, or fate forcing her to confront the chapter she'd never finished? Days passed before she decided. Each morning she'd look at Noah, wondering if it was time he knew who his father was, or if some truths were better left in the dark. But the designer in her, the fighter, couldn't resist the challenge of standing in the same room as the man who had underestimated her. Signing that contract felt like reclaiming power. She took a deep breath, penned her name, and sealed her decision with trembling hands. This time, she thought, he'll see the woman who rose without him. A small smile curved her lips, half defiant, half terrified. She had no idea what awaited her across the ocean, only that her past and future were about to collide. Meanwhile, in the towering Monroe headquarters, Ethan leaned over a stack of proposals, unaware that his latest partnership would awaken every regret he'd buried. He had personally approved the collaboration, a Bennett Designs, impressed by its elegance and innovation. The name stirred something faintly familiar, but he brushed it off, too tired to chase ghosts. "This designer is remarkable," his assistant commented, placing another file before him. "Her sketches are unlike anything on the market." Ethan nodded absently, eyes scanning the signature, Ava Bennett. The pen slipped from his hand. For a moment he didn't breathe. The room tilted. It can't be her, he thought, but the letters refused to change. The same name, the same curve of handwriting. It had to be. A shockwave of memories hit him so hard he had to grip the edge of the desk. 7 years of silence crumbled in an instant. That night he couldn't sleep. He poured another drink, the amber liquid shaking in his glass. "Ava Bennett," he whispered to the empty room, the syllables foreign and familiar all at once. He wondered what she looked like now, how she sounded when she laughed, whether she had found someone who deserved her better. The thought of her being happy without him both soothed and stabbed him. He reached for the envelope again, the same one he had never opened, and held it under the lamp's light. "Maybe this is what you meant," he murmured. "If I ever miss you." The next morning, he gave an order that startled his secretary. Confirm the contract. Make sure she designs in-house. I want to meet her team personally. His tone was calm, but his pulse was chaos. For the first time in years, something inside him felt alive. Hope or fear, he couldn't tell. Ava arrived in New York a month later. The city skyline glittered beneath the plane window as she pressed a palm against the glass, whispering to herself, "You can do this." She wore strength like armor, her confidence radiating with every step she took off that plane. Noah had stayed behind with her mother for a few weeks, too young for her to risk exposing him to questions she wasn't ready to answer. As the car drove her through the familiar streets, her eyes caught glimpses of old corners, the cafe they used to visit, the bookstore he once bought her poetry from, and with each glimpse came a tug at her heart. But she refused to let the past dictate her emotions. When she stepped into the grand lobby of Monroe Enterprises, she wasn't the girl who once begged in the rain. She was the woman who had conquered her storms. The receptionist guided her to the top floor, to a glass-walled boardroom overlooking the city. Her heart pounded as the elevator ascended, each floor bringing back memories she had buried too deep. The doors opened with a soft chime, and there it was, the empire he had built, polished and cold. Assistants murmured greetings, cameras flashed, executives whispered about the mysterious designer from London. She kept her chin high, concealing the tremor in her hands. When she entered the boardroom, the hum of conversation ceased. Her portfolio clicked open. She placed her sketches neatly on the table. She didn't look up at first, focusing on her work until she sensed it. A familiar presence in the air, a silence that thickened like fog. A soft voice broke the stillness. "Ava." The sound of her name pulled the air from her lungs. Slowly, she lifted her head. He was there, standing by the window, where sunlight framed him like memory itself. His suit was darker, his eyes older, his face carved by years of loneliness. But those eyes were the same ones she once loved beyond reason. Time had changed everything except the way he looked at her in that moment, like he had just remembered how to breathe. Her heart slammed against her ribs, her fingers gripping the edge of the table to stay upright. For 7 years, she had rehearsed what she would say if this day ever came. Now, words refused to come. The room faded, leaving only the sound of rain against glass and two souls staring across the distance they had both built. Ethan's lips parted, the faintest tremor in his voice as he whispered again, "Ava." And for the first time in 7 years, her world stopped moving. 3. The air inside the Monroe boardroom was sharp with silence, broken only by the sound of the city rain tapping against the tall windows. When Ethan turned around and saw her standing there, time folded in on itself, 7 long years collapsing into a single, aching heartbeat. "Ava," he breathed, his voice trembling between disbelief and longing, a whisper that carried every ounce of regret he had buried beneath business deals and empty smiles. She looked at him, not the man she once knew, but a stranger draped in power and pain. Her elegant posture didn't waver, yet her hands trembled slightly, betraying the storm inside. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting second, the room disappeared. He remembered the way her laughter used to fill his home, the way her touch steadied his restless soul. But the woman before him now was different, graceful, composed, unbreakable. It scared him because she no longer looked like someone who needed him. As they shook hands, something invisible passed between them, a silent collision of what was and what could have been. The moment lingered longer than it should have, a connection too deep for words. Ethan's heartbeat was unsteady, his eyes unable to leave hers. "Welcome back to Monroe Enterprises," he said, his tone low, betraying an emotion he thought he had buried years ago. Ava nodded politely, forcing her voice to stay steady. "Thank you, Mr. Monroe. I look forward to the collaboration. The title, Mr. Monroe, sliced through him like glass. She had once whispered his name with warmth, but now it carried the cold professionalism of a stranger. Around them, executives exchanged polite glances, unaware that the most powerful storm in the room was not the business merger, but the silent one between two souls trying not to break. When the meeting ended, Ethan's gaze followed her across the room. Her steps were measured, elegant, but he saw the moment her composure faltered. When a small voice called from the hallway, "Mommy!" Ethan froze. A boy, no more than 6, stood waiting, his dark curls messy, his little suit slightly too big for his frame. But it wasn't his clothes that caught Ethan's breath. It was the eyes. Those familiar grey-blue eyes that mirrored his own reflection. For a second, he thought the air had been knocked out of his lungs. The boy smiled, running toward Ava, and Ethan's heart stumbled in his chest. His mind screamed for logic. It can't be. It's impossible. But his heart whispered something different, something wild and undeniable. Ava knelt down, hugging her son tightly, her fingers brushing through his hair with tenderness Ethan had once known. The boy looked back briefly, curious about the man who stared at him like a ghost from another life. Their eyes met, and Ethan's world tilted. That same spark, that same innocent curiosity, was once his when he was Noah's age. He wanted to speak, to ask questions, but his throat was dry. Ava sensed his gaze and quickly took her son's hand, whispering softly, "Come, Noah. We're late." That name hit him like thunder. Noah. The name echoed in his mind all evening, a storm he couldn't quiet. Back in his office, Ethan couldn't think straight. The documents on his desk blurred as his mind raced. Ava has a son, Noah, 6 years old. The timeline gnawed at him, every number aligning in cruel precision. He picked up the old envelope from his drawer, the one she'd left 7 years ago. He had never opened it. He had been too proud, too scared. Tonight, pride felt meaningless. He turned the envelope in his hands, noticing the faint smudge of her perfume still lingering. He closed his eyes, hearing her voice again, that trembling whisper the night she begged him not to let go. Regret clawed at his chest. He picked up his phone and dialed her number. It rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. He tried again. Still nothing. Ava sat on her bed miles away, staring at her phone as it buzzed with his name flashing across the screen. Her heart trembled, but she didn't answer. She couldn't. Not yet. She wasn't ready to let him back into a world she had fought so hard to rebuild. Ethan set the phone down and buried his face in his hands. Why won't she talk to me? The city outside glittered, but inside his soul, darkness lingered. He rose, pacing the room like a man haunted by ghosts he created himself. Every memory, her laughter, her tears, the night he walked away, replayed in merciless loops. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, he tore open the envelope. His hands shook as the paper unfolded, revealing just one line in her delicate handwriting. "If one day you remember love, you'll find me where it began." The words hit him like a flood of emotion. He could almost hear her voice whispering them in the dark. His throat tightened. He pressed the letter to his chest, his mind spinning back to the small cafe where they first met, the place that changed everything. Without hesitation, he grabbed his coat and left. The night air was cold, cutting through his shirt as he stepped into the city's glow. He drove aimlessly, the letter still on the seat beside him as raindrops blurred his vision. Every streetlight felt like a reminder of what he'd lost. He pulled up to the cafe, still standing, though it looked different now, newer, brighter, yet carrying the same familiar warmth. He stepped inside, the smell of coffee and old memories wrapping around him like an embrace. He glanced toward their old table in the corner, the one where she'd once spilled sugar and laughed like sunlight itself. His heart clenched. He was about to sit when something caught his eye, a small folded paper resting on the table. Curious, he opened it. Inside was a child's drawing. A tall man, a woman with long hair, and a boy holding both their hands beneath a smiling sun. Below it, written in careful, uneven handwriting, were the words, "My family," and a signature that made his entire world stop spinning. Noah A. Bennett. The A stood out like a scream. His breath hitched as realization clawed through him. Ava. He could hardly move. The cafe seemed to fade into silence as his pulse roared in his ears. He sank into the chair, staring at the drawing, unable to decide whether to smile or cry. His trembling fingers brushed over the ink, tracing the shape of the boy's grin. His son's grin. His son. His throat tightened with disbelief, awe, and guilt. He whispered the name, Noah, and it felt like both a prayer and a confession. He wanted to find Ava right then, to tell her he knew that he'd missed everything that mattered. But a voice inside warned him, she doesn't trust you anymore, and maybe she shouldn't. He left the cafe with the drawing in his pocket, his mind racing. The city lights blurred as he walked toward his car, each step heavy with determination and fear. He had spent 7 years building empires, but now, for the first time, he realized he'd lost the only kingdom that mattered, the one built of love. Somewhere across the city, Ava tucked Noah into bed, her heart uneasy. She didn't know why, but tonight, her son had drawn something different, a picture of 3 hands instead of 2. She kissed his forehead gently and whispered, "Sweet dreams, my heart." As she turned off the light, she glanced at the small drawing on his bedside table, another version of the same one Ethan now held in his pocket. The connection between them pulsed quietly through the night, unseen but alive, a thread destiny refused to cut. Outside, thunder rolled again, the same way it had the night Ethan let her go. And now, as the storm brewed, something inside both of them began to awaken, an unspoken truth waiting for sunrise. The next morning, when Ethan walked into his office, he found a visitor's pass on his desk, one signed under the name Ava Bennett. She was coming back, not as the woman he left behind, but as the mother of the son he never knew he had. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the marble floor of Ethan's office, but it did little to warm the cold dread twisting in his chest. He stood by the window, the city alive beneath him, yet all he could see was the name on that visitor's pass, Ava Bennett. He traced the letters with his thumb as if trying to feel her through them, his heart pounding in an unfamiliar rhythm. The name wasn't random. Bennett, that was her mother's maiden name. It wasn't just a business alias, it was a shield, a quiet rebellion, a way of saying she had rebuilt her world without him. His reflection in the glass looked powerful, but hollow. A man who could command an empire, but not the love of one woman and child who truly mattered. For the first time in years, he didn't call for his assistant or check his schedule. Instead, he followed the sound of his heart as it led him to the design studio downstairs, where he knew she would be. The studio smelled like fabric, coffee, and faint jasmine, the scent that always clung to her. Ava stood near the window, sketching something with delicate precision. The morning light kissed her skin, soft and golden, and for a second, Ethan forgot how to breathe. He watched her quietly, noticing how focused she looked, how peaceful, until she sensed his presence. Her pencil froze mid-line, her shoulders stiffened, and slowly, she turned. Their eyes met, and 1,000 words passed without either speaking. He stepped closer, careful not to startle her, his voice low but steady. "You should have told me?" Ava's lips parted slightly, her breath catching. "Told you what?" Her tone was calm, but he could hear the tremor beneath it. Fear, pain, maybe guilt. Ethan swallowed hard, his voice breaking. "About Noah, about our son." She flinched as if struck, her hand tightening around the pencil until it snapped in two. Her eyes glistened, but she refused to let the tears fall. "And what would you have done, Ethan? Married me out of guilt?" Her question was sharp, cutting, but it wasn't cruel. It was honest. He took a step closer, his chest heaving with everything he'd buried for 7 years. "No," he said quietly, his voice breaking into pieces. "I would have stayed." Ava shook her head slowly, bitterness and heartbreak flickering in her gaze. "No, you wouldn't have." Her tone was soft but firm, each word carrying the weight of their past. "You had already chosen power over love. You let me walk away, Ethan. You told me not to interfere." Her words burned, and Ethan felt the truth slice through him like a blade. He remembered that night, the rain, her trembling voice, his coldness, and guilt twisted deeper than ever. "I was wrong," he whispered. "I thought I was doing what was best for both of us. I thought you'd be better off without me." Ava gave a broken laugh, her tears finally falling. "You thought too much, Ethan. I didn't need perfection. I just needed you." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with everything they had lost. Ethan reached out slowly, his fingers brushing against her wrist. She didn't pull away, but she didn't lean in either. Between them hung 7 years of unspoken words. "I want to know him," he said softly. "Not because I deserve it, but because he deserves to know his father." His sincerity shook her. For a long moment, Ava didn't speak, then finally whispered, "He's happy, Ethan. He doesn't need his world shaken." He nodded, pain flickering across his face. "Then let me earn my place in it." Quietly, days turned into weeks, and true to his word, Ethan didn't force his way in. He began to appear where Noah was, quietly, respectfully, never demanding, never loud. The first time was at a school play. He sat in the back, his heart pounding as Noah appeared on stage, wearing a paper crown. When the little boy smiled, Ethan felt tears sting his eyes. That smile was his, the same mischievous tilt, the same light. After the play, he stayed back, content just to watch from a distance as Ava hugged Noah, pride glowing in her eyes. For once, Ethan didn't want to control the world. He just wanted to be part of this small, perfect one he had missed. The next time was at a charity dinner. Ava was presenting her new fashion line, and Noah was sitting at their table, doodling with crayons. Ethan found himself watching the boy more than the models. When Noah accidentally dropped his crayons, Ethan knelt beside him to pick them up. Their hands brushed, and Noah smiled shyly. "Thank you, mister." Ethan's voice caught as he whispered back, "You're welcome, champ." That tiny word, champ, slipped out naturally, a word he hadn't used in years, and it sent an ache through his chest. Ava saw the exchange from across the room and froze, torn between fear and something she couldn't name. Maybe hope. Little by little, Ethan became a quiet presence. At school events, community fairs, art exhibitions. He never overstepped, but Noah grew used to seeing him around. One afternoon, when Ava was running late to pick Noah up, Ethan found the boy sitting alone on the bench outside. He sat beside him, not saying a word at first. The silence between them felt peaceful. "You come to a lot of my shows," Noah said suddenly, his tone curious. Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe I just like good performances." Noah laughed softly, his laughter so familiar it tore at Ethan's heart. "Mom says I get my creativity from her," Noah said proudly. Ethan nodded. "She's right. She's incredible." Noah tilted his head, studying him. "You talk like you know her really well." Ethan's throat tightened. "Maybe I used to." When Ava arrived, she found them laughing. Ethan crouched beside her son, helping him tie his shoelaces, something so simple yet so intimate it made her chest ache. She didn't say anything, just watched quietly before calling out, "Ready to go, sweetheart?" Noah ran to her, his backpack bouncing, while Ethan straightened slowly, his eyes meeting hers. "Thank you," she said softly, "for waiting with him." He nodded, his voice rough. "Any time." Their words were simple, but the air between them was thick with what neither could say. As days went by, Ava's walls began to tremble. She watched the way Noah's face lit up whenever Ethan was around, how easily they connected. One evening after dinner, Noah asked, "Mom, why does Mr. Monroe look like me?" The question made her drop her spoon. "What do you mean, honey?" she asked carefully. Noah shrugged, his innocent eyes wide. "We both have the same eyes." Even Miss Clara at school said so. Ava smiled faintly, masking her panic. "People sometimes just look alike, sweetheart." But later that night she stood by the window, her heart torn. She knew the truth couldn't stay hidden forever. A week later, as autumn leaves painted the streets gold, Ethan offered to walk them home after a late dinner meeting. Ava hesitated, then nodded. The three of them walked together under the streetlights, their footsteps echoing softly against the cobblestones. Noah skipped ahead, humming, while Ethan and Ava walked side by side. "He's incredible," Ethan murmured. Ava smiled faintly. "He's my world." Ethan looked at her. "He's mine too, even if he doesn't know it yet." She turned her head, emotion flickering in her eyes. "Don't say things you can't keep, Ethan." He shook his head. "This time, I will." They reached her house, and Ava told Noah to unpack his bag before bed. As she helped him, something fell out. An old photo, slightly crumpled. She froze. It was a picture of her and Ethan, taken years ago on a sunny afternoon at that same cafe. Her heart twisted. "Where did you get this, sweetheart?" she asked softly. Noah smiled innocently. "It was in the box of your old things. I like it. I keep it in my bag sometimes." Ava turned the photo over, and her breath caught when she saw what was written in his uneven handwriting. "My dream family." Her hands trembled as she stared at the words. Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. Ethan stood at the doorway, having seen the photo in her hands. Their eyes met, and for a long, unbroken moment, the world went still. There was no need for words. Everything they had both tried to bury was there, raw and undeniable. The walls between them had begun to crack, and through the cracks, love was slowly finding its way back in. That night, as Ethan drove home, Noah's words echoed in his mind. "Why does he look like me?" And for the first time, Ethan knew he couldn't wait any longer. Tomorrow, he would tell Noah the truth, even if it meant losing everything. The night was quiet, but Ethan couldn't escape the echo of Noah's voice in his head. The streetlights blurred as he drove through the city, the hum of the engine drowning beneath the roar of his thoughts. He could still see Noah's wide, curious eyes, still hear the innocent question that had pierced his soul. "Why does Mr. Monroe look like me?" It wasn't just curiosity, it was destiny calling him to face what he had avoided for far too long. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles pale, a storm raging inside his chest. He had built his empire on control, yet in front of a 6-year-old boy, he had never felt so powerless. He parked outside his mansion, but he couldn't bring himself to step out. The house that once felt like victory now felt like a hollow museum of regret. Meanwhile, across town, Ava sat on the edge of her bed, holding the old photo of her and Ethan. The edges were worn, the colors fading, but the emotions in that picture, the way Ethan had looked at her back then, the way she had smiled without fear, were alive as ever. Noah's handwriting on the back tore at her heart. "My dream family." She traced the words with trembling fingers, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. That little boy's dream was pure, untouched by betrayal or pride. But could she give him that dream? Could she forgive the man who had once broken her so deeply? She wanted to say no, but her heart whispered yes, the kind of yes that comes from love that never truly dies. She closed her eyes, her mind filled with the image of Ethan watching Noah with quiet tenderness, of his voice when he had said, "He's mine too, even if he doesn't know it yet." A soft knock startled her from her thoughts. She wiped her tears quickly, her heart already knowing who it was. Ethan's silhouette appeared behind the glass door, the glow of the hallway framing him like a man standing between past and redemption. For a moment she wanted to tell him to go, to leave before her heart betrayed her again. But something stopped her. "Come in," she said softly. The door creaked open, and he stepped inside, his eyes red-rimmed, his expression raw and vulnerable. He wasn't the polished CEO tonight. He was just Ethan, the man who had once kissed her under the rain and promised her forever. He stood near her, hands trembling slightly. "Can we talk?" His voice was low, almost pleading. Ava nodded without looking up. Silence stretched between them, thick with everything left unsaid. Then Ethan spoke again, his words breaking the fragile air. "I didn't marry for love, Ava. I thought success would fill the emptiness, but it didn't. It never did." His confession cracked something inside her. She met his eyes, tears already forming. "You can't rewrite the past, Ethan. You can't undo the nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering why I wasn't enough." He stepped closer, closing the distance between them until she could feel his warmth. "I'm not trying to rewrite the past," he said softly, taking her trembling hands in his. "Then what are you trying to do?" she whispered, her voice quivering. His grip tightened gently. "Then let me write the future, Ava. One where I never let go again." His words were fragile but full of hope. Ava's heart ached as she looked at him. The man who had once broken her dreams was now begging to build them anew. She wanted to trust him, but pain still whispered caution. A sudden gust of wind pushed the window curtains aside, making her glance toward the moonlit sky. Everything about the night felt like destiny had paused to watch them. "Ethan," she began, her tone trembling between forgiveness and fear. But before she could say more, he spoke again, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't have to answer tonight. Just let me stay. Not as a CEO, not as someone from your past, but as a man who finally understands what love costs." His vulnerability was disarming, and for a fleeting second, Ava saw the man she had loved, the man who used to bring her coffee every morning, who had memorized her favorite songs, who had once painted their initials on a stone by the lake. Her breath caught as the memories flooded back, uninvited but unstoppable. She felt his hand graze hers, slow and uncertain, and her heart skipped a beat. She didn't pull away. For the first time in 7 years, they stood close enough to feel each other's heartbeat. "Why now?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan swallowed hard, his gaze unwavering. "Because I've lived every day since you left asking myself, what if? And today, when I saw him, our son, I realized love doesn't vanish, Ava. It waits." His words made her chest tighten, and though she wanted to resist, tears spilled freely down her cheeks. Ethan reached up, brushing a tear away with his thumb. The touch was soft, reverent, almost sacred. Ava closed her eyes, torn between surrender and self-preservation. "Don't make me believe again unless you mean it," she murmured. "I do mean it," he replied instantly. "I've lost everything before, but losing you twice would destroy me." She looked up at him, their faces inches apart, the air thick with the pull of unfinished love. The moment was fragile, electric, one heartbeat away from a kiss. Then a small voice broke the silence. "Mom!" Ava turned sharply toward the door, her heart jumping. There, in his pajamas, stood Noah, holding his stuffed bear and blinking sleepily. His innocent eyes darted from her to Ethan. "Why are you both crying?" he asked softly. Ava wiped her tears quickly and forced a smile. "It's okay, sweetheart. Go back to bed." But Noah didn't move. He stared at Ethan, his little brows furrowing as he pieced things together. Children could see truths adults often ran from. "Why did you leave my mom?" he asked suddenly, his voice clear, his tone filled with confusion more than accusation. Ethan froze, his heart stopping mid-beat. Ava's breath caught. This was the moment she had dreaded and prayed for, all at once. Ethan knelt down to Noah's level, his hands trembling. "Noah," he began, his voice soft but heavy with emotion. "When I was younger, I made mistakes. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I hurt your mom instead. And I've been trying to make it right ever since." Noah blinked, trying to understand, his small face serious. Ethan's voice cracked as he continued. "If I could go back, I'd never leave her again. I'd never leave you." For a second, Noah just stared at him, silent, unreadable. The air felt frozen, every second stretching like eternity. Then, slowly, the boy tilted his head and asked the question that shattered the fragile calm. "But Mom's getting married too!" The words hit like a thunderclap. Ava gasped, her eyes widening in shock, and Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. "What did you just say?" he whispered. Noah looked confused. "Uncle Liam told me he's going to marry Mom soon." "Isn't that good?" The innocence in his tone twisted the knife deeper. Ava's lips parted, but no sound came out. Ethan's expression hardened, not in anger, but in pain so raw it made his chest ache. He stood slowly, his voice breaking. "You're marrying him?" Ava couldn't meet his eyes. The silence that followed was unbearable. The sound of the ticking clock filled the room like a heartbeat, counting down to something neither of them could stop. Ethan's jaw tightened, his chest heaving. "So while I was trying to rebuild what I destroyed, someone else already did," he said quietly. His words weren't bitter, they were broken. Ava took a trembling step forward. "It's not what you think." But Ethan shook his head, his eyes glistening. "Then tell me what it is." Before she could speak, Noah yawned and hugged her leg. "Good night, Mom." "Good night, Mr. Monroe." He smiled sleepily before padding off to his room. The door closed softly, leaving Ethan and Ava standing in the middle of the room, their love, guilt, and fate tangled together, and one truth echoing between them. Some hearts don't break clean, they shatter in silence. And that night, as Ethan walked away, his mind spun with one question that refused to fade. Was he too late to win back the only woman he ever truly loved? The silence that followed Noah's innocent words felt heavier than thunder. Ava stood frozen, her fingers tightening around the photograph she still held, while Ethan's expression faltered as if the ground beneath him had vanished. "Mom's getting married too." The words echoed through the hallway, twisting like a blade into Ethan's chest. He had faced ruthless competitors, lost millions, conquered empires. But this was a defeat that pierced deeper than anything he had ever known. He looked at Ava, searching for denial, for a flicker that said the boy was mistaken, but her eyes dropped to the floor, tears threatening to fall, confirming what his heart already feared. That night stretched endlessly. When Noah finally fell asleep, the quiet between them spoke more than words ever could. Ethan lingered by the doorway, his voice low and trembling. "Is it true?" Ava didn't answer right away. Her hand brushed the edge of the photo again, the one Noah had tucked into his backpack, the one where Ethan's arm was around her and laughter danced in their eyes. "It's complicated," she finally whispered. Days later, Ethan learned the name, Liam Carter, the man Ava had leaned on when the world turned its back on her. Liam wasn't just anyone. He was her business partner, her friend, her silent protector through all those lost years. He had been there when Noah took his first steps, when she cried alone at night, when she swore she'd never fall again. Ethan felt his stomach tighten when he saw them together for the first time after hearing the news. Liam's hand rested gently on her back, protective yet familiar, while Noah laughed freely between them. Ethan stood at a distance, watching, realizing he was the outsider now. For the first time in years, the mighty CEO felt powerless. He wanted to storm toward them, to reclaim what was his, but guilt chained him. He had let her go once. Could he demand her now? The following week passed in a blur of headlines and heartbreak. Monroe Enterprises was preparing for a grand charity gala, the kind of event where masks were worn not just on faces but in hearts. Ava was invited as one of the featured designers, her fashion label sponsoring the event. Ethan knew she'd be there. He told himself he would stay composed, that he'd congratulate her, shake Liam's hand, and leave. But deep down, he knew that was a lie. When she walked into the ballroom that night, every camera, every whisper faded into nothing. Her gown shimmered softly under the golden chandeliers, her hair pinned delicately, her smile practiced yet haunted. Ethan forgot how to breathe. For a moment, time folded, and the years between them vanished. Liam stood by her side, charming, confident, unaware of the emotional storm brewing behind those polite smiles. When Ethan approached, Ava stiffened, her pulse quickening. "Ava," he greeted softly, his tone stripped of the arrogance that once defined him. Liam extended his hand politely. "Ethan Monroe," he said with a composed smile, "I've heard much about you." Ethan shook it firmly, his eyes never leaving Ava's. "I'm sure you have," he replied quietly. The tension was palpable. Two men, one love, and a silence filled with things unsaid. Hours passed, and the evening glittered with laughter and luxury, but Ava's heart felt trapped between the two worlds, the man who once broke her and the man who helped her rebuild. As she moved through the crowd, she felt Ethan's gaze on her, unrelenting, filled with longing and regret. Every step she took was a battle to appear unaffected. Later that night, the music softened, and as fate would have it, the host announced a slow dance for the evening's final moment. Liam was called away by a business associate, leaving Ava standing by the edge of the dance floor. Ethan approached her quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "May I?" She hesitated, every part of her screaming no, but her heart betrayed her. She placed her hand in his, and the world seemed to still. Their bodies moved in quiet rhythm, each step heavy with memories. His hand rested gently on her waist, her heartbeat echoing beneath his fingertips. The distance they had built over 7 years melted with every sway. "Does he make you feel what I did?" Ethan murmured, his voice breaking the fragile silence. Ava looked up sharply, pain flashing in her eyes. "You don't get to ask that." But her voice wavered, betraying the emotions she tried so hard to bury. Ethan leaned closer, the scent of her perfume igniting every memory he'd tried to forget. "Then tell me you've forgotten me," he challenged softly. She couldn't. Her lips parted, but no words came. The music ended, but their eyes stayed locked, suspended in the gravity of their past. After the dance, Ava escaped into the hallway, needing air, space, distance. Her heart pounded wildly as she tried to steady her breath. She hated that he could still affect her like this. She hated that her hands still trembled where his touch lingered. As she reached for her clutch to find her car keys, something slipped out. A folded note she hadn't seen before. She frowned, unfolding it slowly, and her breath caught as she recognized the handwriting instantly. Ethan's. The ink was slightly smudged, as if written in haste or pain. The words were simple yet devastating. "If you ever feel I still belong to you, meet me where we first said goodbye." Her fingers tightened around the paper, her mind flashing back to that night in the rain, on the marble steps of his estate, where everything had ended. A tear slid down her cheek before she could stop it. She wanted to throw the note away, to forget it, to bury the ache it stirred. But her heart refused. The memory of that night, of the man who had once broken and worshipped her in the same breath, burned brighter than ever. Somewhere deep inside, she still loved him, and that terrified her. Back inside the ballroom, Ethan stood alone near the balcony, watching her from afar. He didn't know if she'd come, but the hope in his chest refused to die. For once, the man who had everything was willing to risk losing it all again, just to feel her heart beat once more against his. The night was far from over, and both of them knew that whatever choice Ava made next would change everything. As Ava drove home later that night, the folded note sat on the passenger seat beside her. At a red light, she glanced at it again, her hand trembling as she whispered to herself, "Where we first said goodbye." Her car turned toward that very place, unaware that Ethan was already waiting there in the rain. The rain was relentless that night, cascading against the windshield as Ava gripped the steering wheel tighter, her heart pounding louder than the thunder outside. Ethan's note trembled in her hands on the passenger seat, the ink slightly smudged where her tears had touched it earlier. "If you ever feel I still belong to you, meet me where we first said goodbye." The words echoed in her mind, looping between fear and hope, past and present, love and loss. She hadn't meant to come, not at first, but something deep inside her, a pull stronger than reason, had led her through the storm. Each mile closer to the Monroe estate brought memories rushing back. His cold goodbye under the same rain 7 years ago, the echo of her own heart breaking, and the weight of the secret she had carried alone for years. Her headlights cut through the mist as the old mansion appeared like a ghost of the past, standing tall and somber, its windows flickering with dim light. She parked, hands trembling as she stepped out, her heels sinking slightly into the wet ground. The air smelled of rain and nostalgia, of beginnings and endings tied in one breath. As she approached the old oak tree near the estate's fountain, the very spot where he had once told her not to interfere, she saw him. Ethan stood there, drenched but unmoving, the rain dripping from his hair, his suit clinging to him. He looked older, wearier, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't changed, something that still burned quietly for her. When their gazes met, the world seemed to still. "You remembered," he said softly, his voice almost lost to the rain. Ava swallowed hard, her chest tightening as 1,000 emotions collided. "How could I forget?" she whispered, her tone breaking under the weight of years gone by. For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain filled the silence between them, washing away everything except the truth neither could run from anymore. Ethan stepped closer, hesitant but determined. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he admitted. Ava's lips quivered. "I almost didn't." Her voice was fragile, caught between courage and collapse. He smiled faintly, pain flickering beneath his eyes. "But you did." That single acknowledgement carried every unspoken apology, every sleepless night, every memory that refused to fade. The tension between them was unbearable, familiar yet frightening. Ava felt her breath hitch as Ethan took another step forward. The years apart hadn't dulled what they had. If anything, it made the air between them electric, alive with everything left unsaid. "Why did you ask me to meet you here?" she finally asked, her tone trembling. He looked up at the dark sky, rain dripping from his lashes. "Because this is where I destroyed everything that ever mattered to me," he said quietly. "And it's the only place I could try to rebuild it." Her heart twisted painfully as she searched his face, wondering if she could trust what she saw there. He took a shaky breath, his voice breaking. "Ava, I've tried to move on. I've tried to forget you. But every time I look at a design in one of your magazines, every time I see Noah's smile, I see us. I see what I lost." Her name on his lips sounded like prayer and punishment at once. Ava turned away, her hands trembling as she brushed the tears from her cheeks. Don't, she whispered. Don't make this harder. Ethan closed the distance between them, his hand reaching out before hesitating mid-air, afraid to touch what he no longer had the right to. I broke us once, he said, his tone low and heavy, but I won't let life end with regret again. She turned toward him, eyes filled with pain. You think it's that easy? She asked. You think you can just show up and fix what you shattered? He looked at her, guilt swimming in his gaze. No. I know I can't fix the past, but I can fight for what's left of the future. He took another step, his voice softer now. Ava, I never stopped loving you, even when I tried to convince myself I had. I watched you grow, succeed, and raise a beautiful son, all from afar. Do you know how that felt, watching you live the life I should have been a part of? She looked at him in disbelief. You watched me. Ethan nodded, eyes glistening. I followed every fashion, show, every headline, every award. You were radiant, unstoppable, and every time I was proud and broken all at once. Ava's tears blended with the rain as she shook her head. Why are you telling me this now? She whispered. Because, he said, stepping closer until only inches separated them, I can't live pretending anymore. The honesty in his tone stripped her defenses bare. Ethan, she breathed, her heart aching. And what if I'm too afraid to trust you again? His eyes softened, his voice barely above a whisper. Then I'll spend the rest of my life earning it. For a heartbeat, time stopped. The rain slowed to a whisper, and the wind carried the scent of wet earth and bittersweet love. Ava felt her chest rise and fall with every word he said. You hurt me once, she said, her voice shaking, and I promised myself I'd never let you close enough to do it again. Ethan's eyes locked on hers, unwavering. Then let me prove I'm not the same man who said goodbye under this rain. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, silence spoke volumes. Memories, pain, and longing filling the gaps. He reached out, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. The touch sent a shock through her body, a mix of pain and desire she couldn't hide. The tension grew unbearable. She closed her eyes briefly as if to fight back the tears, but when she opened them again, Ethan was closer. Too close. Ava, he murmured, his voice trembling as his breath mingled with hers. For a moment it felt like the world had spun back in time, before betrayal, before regret, when love was all they knew. She could feel his warmth even through the chill of the storm, and for a heartbeat, she almost let herself believe again. Then, a sudden flash of lightning illuminated the estate behind them, snapping her back to reality. She stepped back slightly, gasping for breath. This doesn't change anything, she said weakly. But even she didn't believe her words. Ethan's jaw tightened. Then tell me to walk away, he challenged softly. If you truly don't feel anything anymore, tell me, and I'll leave you alone forever. Ava stared at him, tears gathering again. Her lips trembled, but the words wouldn't come. The silence that followed was her answer. Ethan smiled sadly, understanding what she couldn't say aloud. You can't, can you? He whispered. She looked down, heart pounding violently in her chest. You don't understand, she whispered. I have someone who's been there for me, someone who's good and kind and... She stopped herself, guilt flooding her tone. Ethan's voice hardened slightly, though his eyes stayed gentle. Liam. The name hung heavy between them, heavier than the storm around them. Ethan looked away for a moment, his chest rising and falling with visible restraint. I know he's good to you, he said quietly, and maybe he deserves you more than I do. But tell me, Ava, when he holds you, does your heart race the way it just did now? She froze, unable to respond. The rain poured harder, masking the tears running down her cheeks. You don't get to ask that, she finally said, her voice breaking. Ethan nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on her. "You're right. I don't. But I needed to know if there's still a chance for me to try." The moment was unbearably raw. They stood under the same tree where their love had once ended, and now teetered on the edge of rebirth. The storm raged around them, but neither moved. Ethan took a deep breath, his voice shaking with emotion. "I meant every word, Ava. I won't leave until you believe that." He stepped closer, lowering his forehead to hers in silent surrender. The world blurred for both of them, the rain, the trees, the years, all fading until only their heartbeats filled the space. Ava's eyes fluttered shut, her lips trembling as if the next second might rewrite their fate. Ethan leaned in, his breath warm against her skin. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he whispered. "I'm asking for one more chance to love you right." Just as their lips were about to meet, a sudden beam of headlights cut through the rain. A car door slammed shut, and the sound echoed across the estate like a thunderclap. Ava pulled back instantly, eyes wide. Ethan turned, his expression hardening as a familiar figure emerged from the shadows. Liam. He was drenched, his coat soaked, but his face was calm. Too calm. His voice broke the silence, steady but heavy with heartbreak. "I think you forgot something, Ava," he said, stepping closer. In his hand, glinting under the rain, was a small velvet box. He opened it slowly, revealing the engagement ring. "Your ring." The air went still. Ava's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. Ethan's heart sank as the realization hit him like a blade. Liam's expression wasn't angry. It was defeated, understanding, even kind. "I saw the way you looked at him," he said softly, pain trembling beneath every word. "Love like that doesn't fade, Ava. It waits." He whispered, "I'm not here to claim what's mine, Ava. I'm here to build what I broke." She closed her eyes at his touch, feeling warmth seep into the cracks she'd kept hidden for 7 years. "I don't know how to start again," she said shakily. Ethan's thumb brushed her tear-soaked cheek. "You don't have to," he murmured. "Just let me walk beside you while we find our way back." Weeks slipped by like fragments of dreams, gentle, uncertain, yet filled with quiet miracles. Ethan didn't rush her. He visited her boutique, not as a CEO with power, but as a man who simply wanted to see her smile. Sometimes he'd sit in the back corner while she worked, pretending to scroll through his phone, but stealing glances every few seconds, memorizing her laughter again. Sometimes he'd bring Noah lunch, helping him with school projects, slowly becoming part of a life he once could have ruined completely. Ava noticed the small things, how Ethan no longer demanded control, how he listened when she spoke, how he looked at her like every second was a second chance he refused to waste. Healing wasn't quick. Some nights, she still woke from dreams of the past, her heart aching with old scars. But every time, Ethan was there, holding her hand, whispering, "You're safe. You're not alone anymore." The day she stood on stage to accept her design award, she could hardly believe how far she'd come. The hall glowed with gold lights and quiet admiration. Cameras flashed as her name was called, and when she stepped up to the microphone, her voice trembled with emotion. "This award," she began, her eyes scanning the crowd until they found him, Ethan, standing in the back, his eyes shining with pride and love, "isn't just for success or survival. It's for the second chances life gives us when we finally learn to forgive. It's for the man who once let me go, but came back to hold me again." A ripple of soft murmurs swept through the crowd, but she didn't care. Her words weren't for them, they were for him. Ethan's throat tightened, his heart pounding as he watched her glow beneath the lights. For a man who once built empires from stone and silence, that moment was the first time he realized what real wealth looked like. Her courage, her light, her forgiveness. After the ceremony, the crowd dispersed into soft laughter and champagne glasses, but Ethan stayed rooted in place, waiting for her. When she finally appeared, wearing a simple white dress that caught the light just right, his breath caught. He walked toward her, slow but sure, the noise around them fading until all that remained was the echo of their shared heartbeat. Then, without any grand speech or fancy setting, Ethan sank to one knee before her, not as the CEO everyone feared, but as a man stripped of pride and full of love. "Marry me, Ava," he said softly, his voice trembling. "Not for the past we both survived, but for every tomorrow we can build together." Her hands flew to her mouth, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "Ethan." He smiled, that old crooked smile that once melted her world. "Only if you promise never to say, 'Don't interfere again,'" she said through her tears, half laughing, half sobbing. He chuckled, rising to his feet and pulling her close, his forehead resting against hers. "I'll never say it again," he promised, his voice breaking. "Because now I want you in everything, every dream, every fight, every morning, every night." The room faded away as their lips met, soft at first, then deeper, more desperate, years of longing and regret melting into one perfect kiss. When they finally pulled apart, the applause of the few onlookers echoed around them, but neither of them cared. They were no longer the broken lovers who once stood under the rain. They were something stronger, two souls that had wandered the world only to find home in each other again. Months later, their wedding wasn't grand, but it was perfect. Noah walked her down the aisle, clutching her hand proudly, while Ethan waited at the altar with tears in his eyes. When they exchanged vows, it wasn't just a promise of love. It was a promise of endurance, of choosing each other every single day, even when life got hard again. As the sun set behind them, painting the sky with soft gold, Ava looked up at the man who once shattered her and smiled, the same smile that had once been lost. "You know," she whispered, "love didn't die 7 years ago." Ethan brushed a strand of hair from her face, his eyes glistening. "No," he said softly. "It simply waited for both our hearts to grow strong enough to hold it again." She leaned into his chest as the world blurred around them, and in that quiet, eternal moment, they both knew. This time, love wasn't something they would lose. It was something they would live forever. And that was today's story on Beyond Color Stories. If this touched your heart, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give it a like, and share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Tell me in the comments, what part moved you the most? I read every single one of your thoughts. Until next time, keep believing in love, keep healing, and remember, true love never fades. It only waits. See you in the next story.